among young people here in the West, here in Canada certainly, and in the United States, members of Gen Z particularly, there's this growing sort of political culture right now where young people are out protesting the patriarchy, protesting against white supremacy, and they've turned that into a religion. They're fighting against this evil satanic force of sorts, which is white supremacy, or it's, you know, toxic masculinity, or it's transphobia, Islamophobia. Like, these are the things that they are fighting against primarily, opposed to fighting sort of the monster within. So there's kind of like an external locus of control here, right? It's fighting against the external opposed to the internal. So
well, this is why, and I outline this to some degree in Beyond Order and also in my first book, Maps of Meaning. There are the world is characterized by ignorance and malevolence and danger. Always, always, always. It's an existential truth. And then you might ask yourself, well, if that's the case, how might you best conceptualize that? Now, you can find malevolence and ignorance at the level of the individual. And so we would say that's the malevolence and ignorance that characterizes you and other individuals. And it's a viciously powerful and terrifying force. And then there's the malevolence and ignorance that characterizes social institutions. That's the great father, that's the negative aspect of the great father in my terminology. And that's derived to some degree from Jungian theory, especially through a man named Erich Neumann, who is a brilliant student of Jung. You're always a victim of the evil tyrant. And the reason for that is that human beings have a lengthy period of intense socialization. And that fosters and develops your individuality in some ways, but crushes and maims and distorts and destroys it in all sorts of other ways. And so it's a universal tendency to feel oppressed by the evil tyrant. And it's so powerful symbolically. It's such a powerful symbolic tendency that people don't even notice that it's a symbolic tendency. So I've been taken to task, for example, for insisting that we use gendered metaphors to portray the two fundamental attributes of experienced reality: chaos and order. Order is patriarchal. That's the symbol. Well, people accept that at face value and don't even notice that they're trapped in a symbolic world. The very feminists who will criticize me for pointing out that femininity is associated with chaos symbolically accept the idea that masculinity is the proper representation for social order without question, and are irritated beyond belief if you point out that things are not so simple. They're caught in a myth, a religious myth, and they don't even realize it. And so if you accept that the patriarchy is masculine, well, then what's feminine? Well, the opposite of patriarchy and order, and that's creative chaos. And that's not my theory. That's the Taoist theory of being, for example. It's the ancient Greek chaos and cosmos theory of being. It's the ideational structure that underlies the first chapters of Genesis, where God makes order out of a patriarchal God, makes order out of tohu vabohu, which is the primordial chaos. So now young people find themselves motivated to stand up against the evil tyrant. And of course they should, because it's at that point when you're differentiating yourself that you want to take a look at the group that you're going to pledge allegiance to and note its shortcomings. But you don't want to be blind while doing that and fail to notice that, well, the social world is full of pathology and danger, malevolence and ignorance, let's say, but the natural world, which you will automatically tend to romanticize if you only believe the patriarchy is evil, the natural world is doing everything it can to kill you every second. And the only reason you're not dead is because the evil tyrant has a benevolent aspect that protects you in ways that are so deep and profound that you don't begin to understand them. I mean, you are shielded,
Right.
as am I, by a
Yeah.
nuclear umbrella, for example,
Right.
none of
No,
which you have to attend to. And then the other loss, of course, is that, yes, there's evil in the patriarchy. That's always how things are. And sometimes it's much worse than other times. Not right now, by the way, not by historical standards, but it also blinds you to the fact that you're culpable too, deeply. You have more ignorance and malevolence in your soul than you'll ever get into on top of in your entire life. And that should be the knowledge of that stops you from being carelessly judgmental. Carelessly. You should be judgmental. You have to differentiate and discriminate between things, but you shouldn't do it carelessly. And you certainly shouldn't assume that all the fault lies outside, which is the point that you made. And so ideology is extremely dangerous if it convinces young people that the moral stance is that all malevolence and ignorance lies outside of them.
right. Yeah. What do you think is motivating this kind of hallucinatory interpretation of our society being uniquely racist, sexist, homophobic? Like there's this kind of self-delusion going on here where
Well, some of it's ignorance.
right, and I mentioned this in one of my Quillette essays about our society being one of the most free, liberal, open-minded, inclusive societies that has ever existed. Right,
It is the most
for ethnic minorities, sexual minorities, transgender folks, all of that. But yet there's this narrative that me as a brown person, as an immigrant from India, like somehow I'm more of a victim than you are. That I live under this.
On average, you might be somewhat, because it's probably harder to be a minority in any culture than it is to be the majority. But it isn't it isn't the fundamental determinant of the outcome of your life. It's one element, and it's an important element. It's not good for anyone if prejudice doesn't allow us to use all available human capital, right? Even from a purely selfish perspective,
Yeah.
it's foolish. So, and why do we think that? A lot of it's ignorance. Is people don't know, for example, that up until 1880, 95% of the Western world lived below today's UN established poverty line.
Yeah.
We have no idea how much dramatic improvement has been made in the last 150 years and how absolutely god awful things were before that. And we don't know that because we've never been hungry, for example, not for one day.